I'm going to share the screen, and after that we can have a conversation because it's going to be a lot. Hopefully we're going to be on the same page and we can talk about what resonated with you, what you agreed with or disagreed with. So thank you so much for turning up. This is going to be an interesting webinar. I think it's extra useful for HR people and leaders, but also coaches and consultants. So now we have two different webinars and they are specific to a specific audience. So let's start with something difficult. Here's a question. Do you cost more than $20 a month? By show of hands. There's lots of confidence, so it looks like that we value ourselves. Can you prove it? That's the difficult question. How do you do that? And I know it's a difficult question, but knowing the answer is really important because at the moment, probably there is an AI version of you somewhere that can, at least on a surface level, do what you do from a customer perspective. If you are in HR, if you're a coach, or even maybe as a leader, what's your identity? How do you prove your value? It's not easy. So we are priced against this. And if you can answer this question objectively, in a language that the clients understand, you can make much more money, yes. But we are competing with robots. Let's not forget about that. Because at least in the surface level, they might do what we do. So there is a revolution now, the AI revolution. There are two really strong forces squeezing our field. One is AI, the other one is the increasing uncertainty. Very difficult. So of course the clients are demanding more. The companies are facing different challenges that also require different solutions. So how do you stay relevant in this age? This is the real question. And one of the most important insights is this, that a leadership identity built by the past is the most expensive thing you can carry into a decade that no longer resembles the one that built them. And I know it's a long sentence, but also it's true because we were shaped by the challenges of the last century. But let's be honest, everything is different now. We can see that, we can feel it, and clients have options. That's the challenge with this. Look at this, for example. So if you look at, for example, coaching, since 2019, just the ICF, the number of ICF coaches doubled. If you look at the other coaches, the self-proclaimed evangelists and gurus and other coaches, that's even more. It's really diluted. That's the problem with that. But if you look at it, only around 10 or 12% of the coaches have an actual business. The rest, not really. Maybe it's part-time, maybe it's a third-party provider, maybe something internal, and the robots are coming for this layer. So the question is, how can you be in the top 10%? How do you prove that you can make a real difference that goes beyond how much people enjoyed your program? There's a huge difference between enjoyment and value. It's not the same thing, and we are going to talk about that. But let's be honest, the robots are already taking this section, and they're really good at it. So how do you go to the top 10%? If you look at HR, it is transforming as well, because right now it's often seen as an admin function. There's more to it because now the robots are taking over. They can do the manual stuff. So what people need now is strategic insights. They want a strategic partner. But how do you do that? The teams are getting smaller. By 2030, it's going to be half of the size, and you have to be more strategic. I talk to a lot of HR people, and often the main problem is that their success is invisible, meaning that if everything goes well, then obviously it's easy. If something goes wrong, the HR, how dare you? It's not a pleasant place to be in. That's the problem with that. So how do you become a strategic partner? That is the real question. And let's be honest, it's not a theory, it's already happening. I don't know if you saw that Bolt example. They fired the whole HR team because according to the CEO, there was a problem with them. They were not seen as a strategic business partner because according to the CEO, they created more issues than solutions. So he sacked them. And I had a lot of meetings with HR people recently. And there's one overarching theme that there's a lot of pressure to implement AI to increase performance, but they are not addressing the reasons why more than 70% of transformations fail or provide negative ROI. That's a lot of pressure. How do you do that? This is the question. And at the same time, it is also relevant because this is where we are starting now. The workforce is burning out, engagement is plummeting, and the leadership layer is collapsing fastest. The burnout rate is up by 50% compared to the previous year. Engagement is back to where it was more than 10 years ago. And especially the middle layer of the management is collapsing. They are burning out, they are disengaged, and they are the ones who should be leading at least 70% of the workforce. That's not ideal, but this is the starting point. And they have to facilitate the transformation because we are going through the biggest and fastest transformation in history. How do you do that? Do you have the tools? Do you have the knowledge? Or you still have an outdated identity and tools designed for the challenges of the last century. And based on our research, most of the time that is the case. I had a meeting with someone last week. She's an HR director. And when we talked about our solutions, she said, we have all the data we need. We have a lot of engagement surveys. That's fantastic. But how come you have the same problems every single year and nothing changes? And the problem is that when people know that they are missing something, then they are curious. When they think they have the solution, then they close down and they're not looking for anything new. So when we went into the details, and I'm going to share with you these insights during the webinar, and she realized what I write. Because sometimes the data can look fantastic. Engagement is up. But don't forget that often the most engaged teams are the most resistant to change. Engagement shows how people feel about the way things are. It has nothing to do with how willing or able to change the status quo. And that's why a lot of transformations fail. So maybe the chart looks perfect, but the patient is dying because they don't measure and optimize what actually matters in this context. And this is what I want to talk about. Because often companies react to something that they can see, but that's not necessarily the thing that endangers the future of the company. So what is the current state? That 70% of transformations fail because of people in general, but usually around 5% of the budget is spent on the human side. How does that make sense? And I can tell you that, and I'm going to show you later on, that often that 5% is spent on something that doesn't make a real difference. They think they're doing the right thing, but often it backfires. So let's be honest, the stakes are high and the risk is yours. So we work with companies where they facilitate internal transformation. Their career is on the line. They can be HR leaders, they can be the CEO, but it's up to them. If they get it wrong, that's not ideal. But how do you start it when you have a 70% chance of failure while your people are burning out and disengaged? What are your chances? It's not really good. So how can we improve this? This is the question, and that's exactly what we do. We reduce that risk. We work with more than 900 global teams in more than 50 countries. We have a lot of data and a lot of experience, lots of mistakes, lots of success as well. We can measure the 9 biomarkers of psychological safety, motivation, and cognitive diversity with the same discipline as finance or operations. We can go beyond how people feel or how engaged they are. We can measure what actually makes a difference, everything that is linked to growth, profit, and engagement. And also, we can build a capability inside your company so it lasts. It's all about scalability and sustainability. It's not a one-off workshop. We work with you and we hand over the keys because we've done a lot of teamwork, team scans, and the difference is measurable. The result is, well, at least more predictable. We can reduce that risk because it's all about the human side. Technical delivery really rarely results in business result. It's not the same thing. Yet companies focus on AI and they have to realize that when everybody has access to the same technology, your competitive advantage, again, is your people, how they work together, how creative they are, what rapport they build with the clients, and how much you can trust them. That's all about people. Skills are not going to be replaced. Admin functions will. And this is what I did. This is the global leadership team of a Fortune 500 company. This is where they started. They scored low on motivation and psychological safety. This bigger donut is the team average, but you can see the individuals that a team is polarized. Within the same environment, under the same leadership, people feel really differently. 6 months later, this is where they were. Not everybody is in the growth zone, but most of them, which is great. And all the biomarkers improved. Some of them are a bit more polarized. Guessing is not an option when it comes to your business and the future. That's how we can prove our value because they are linked to profit growth and engagement. This is the level of transparency and accuracy that we can provide. My name is Csaba, and I'm the founder of ICQ Global. Started the company more than 10 years ago, and we have more than 250 partners in a lot of different countries. We have a lot of knowledge, at least within the company. We made a lot of mistakes, we had a lot of success, and we have very different backgrounds as well, having worked with government agencies, Fortune 500 companies, and a lot of universities as well. That's our investment in the future. Hopefully, they are going to make better decisions than us. So during this webinar, I would like to explain the 3 invisible forces, why they matter and what they are exactly, and some of the misunderstandings about them. Then I also would like to show you 3 different case studies, just to make it as practical as possible so you can see what I talk about, how differently we can use it. But let's be honest, pretty much every company is going through a transformation. It might be intentional or they might be forced to do so, but they have to change, they have to pivot because the world is changing. And I also want to show you 3 different approaches that sound really good, They sound familiar, but they are not getting the results that you are hoping or paying for. But if you don't have a label for it, it's very difficult to recognize them. So here's an opportunity to do a bit of stock take. The first one is when we address the issues that are not the real problem. And this is what I did a few months ago, but I saw the dashboard of our car and it showed the battery is low. Charged it all night. Next day, it was lower than that. So I called my brother, what is going on? And he explained that we have 2 batteries in the car and that's the one that I cannot charge. I didn't know that. My intention was fantastic, motivation off the chart, result, nothing, or even worse. And that's exactly what's happening in companies as well. They have the budget, they have the best intention. But if they focus on the wrong thing, they're not going to get the results that they want. If you look at, for example, one of the studies by MIT Sloan Management Review, they wanted to understand how come most of the leadership programs provide negative ROI. It's quite a bold statement, but they backed it up. The main reason was that nobody measured the impact on the people who matter the most, the team. Nobody measured the trajectory of the career or the leaders. Often, the evaluation was based on how informative or entertaining the program was. And sometimes they made a decision based on the packaging, almost like a corporate Tinder profile. Looks good, looks familiar, fancy logo, let's do it. Does it work? That's the real question. Is it valuable? Based on their research, they cost a lot of money, but you saw the statistics in the very beginning. It's not that the situation is not improving, it's getting worse. But if everybody is happy, we don't see that. The second one is that often we use outdated and disconnected solutions. And it's not a surprise because most of the management and leadership models that we are using today were created by people who were born just after the American Civil War in the 19th century. They were designed for the challenges of the 50s and 60s. No internet, no cheap flights, no EU. The world was very different. Even if you look at this chart, before 1975, less than 17% of the value was created by humans. They were seen as a cost to contain. Today, that value is more than 90%. It's completely different. And it's a no-brainer that new challenges require new solutions. You can try it harder, but it's not going to get you better results. It's different. But here's the funny one, giving people what they want instead of what they need. So a lot of companies spend on engagement programs, well-being, mental health. But the Industrial Relations Journal had a really interesting research. They analyzed more than 90 different interventions. They wanted to understand which one works. Only one of them had a slightly positive impact, and that was volunteer work. Nothing else. Not the free lunch, not the yoga classes, not the online courses. They did nothing. I'm not saying that you shouldn't give free lunch to people, but if you want engagement, that has nothing to do with it. You spend the money, you're not getting the results. Within this category, you have training programs that are really fancy, like talking about growth mindset, which is great. When people attend the course, after that, they feel that they have growth mindset. But according to Carol Dweck, who coined the term, you can have off-the-chart growth mindset as a person. If your environment is not psychologically safe, it's not nurturing, it has zero benefits. Zero. This is the power of the environment. This is how important it is. And since the pandemic, this is exactly what we can see, that when people had time to think, they were reflecting, they realized that why am I putting up with this toxic environment? So now companies are hurting more. They have to understand that focusing on diversity, fantastic, but diversity without inclusion turns into painful liability. So we have to measure the quality of culture, the quality of team dynamics. That's the missing part. That is the invisible part. But that's exactly what makes a real difference. It's not that I want to work with people who look or sound like me. I want to work in an environment where I feel understood and valued. That's a huge difference. But it's so much easier to focus on the visible part. And I think that's the reason why the D&I field struggled so much, because 99% of the actions were about the visible layer of diversity, not much about inclusion, because most people were really passionate, but not necessarily skilled. And I don't want to discount the importance of the topic because it is more important than ever before, but we have to understand that its reputation is tainted. So we have to fix that. Here's a question. What is the lead indicator and picker quality decision making responsible for 95% of business performance? 95%. You can put it in the chat, but I can tell you that so far, every time I had a meeting with a leader, they couldn't answer the question. I'm just putting more pressure on you. What is it? I ruled psychological safety completely. I did. Because that's the answer. Psychological safety, it is that important. And if we know that, and you ask a leader, where is your team on this dimension? They don't know how to answer that question. They can guess, they can hope, they can assume, but they don't have the data. Psychological safety is the #1 trait of high-performing teams. It's not a new topic. It started in 1788 when they introduced the Chimney Sweeper Act in the UK. And the reason is that people got really upset when they found out that the minimum age to become a chimney sweeper apprentice was 4 years old. Can you imagine that today these tiny babies up on the roof cleaning, they got really pissed off. So it took 250 years, and now we have the same health and safety standards everywhere. But recently, they introduced the 5th category, which is the psychosocial one, because they realized that an attack on the psychological safety can cause much more harm than a broken bone or a slap in the face. But how do you prove it? How do you measure it? And how do you optimize it? That's the difficult part. But we are making progress. To put it in a business context, Google wanted to understand what is the secret of the high-performing teams. Their first assumption was we don't need leaders. Then it turned out that was a really silly idea because you need leaders, but you need good leaders. And the #1 trait was psychological safety. It is that important. It's all about performance and decisions. And yet, most leaders and HR people have no idea about that. But on its own, it's not enough. You also need motivation just to get things done. This is the engine of high-performing teams because it's nice to be comfortable, safe, but nothing grows there. You also need the motivation to speak up, to do something about it. And Daniel Pink has a really interesting take on the topic. He talks about the intrinsic motivators, the evolution of motivation. 1.0 is really primal. Make babies and survive. Enough. But then motivation 2.0 is a bit more serious. It's about the extrinsic motivators, the pain and pleasure principle, the carrot and the stick. But here's the challenge, that research shows that when it comes to creativity and white-collar jobs, it's not that it doesn't work, it backfires. Performance drops. When you have to punish people and reward them to do something manual, that's fantastic. But they also get used to it, so you have to punish and reward them more and more. But if you really want to tap into their potential, you have to focus on motivation 3.0, intrinsic motivators. These are the ones that are coming from inside. When you do something for the sake of the process because you love doing it, that's the challenging part, because in order to do that, you have to understand people. You have to get to know them. They're not just a cog in a machine. That's the challenge with that. Just like Chris Voss, the FBI hostage negotiator, said, there's no such thing as logical, only what matters to someone, because we cannot motivate anyone. That's true. But if I understand what drives you, then I can create the right environment around you and you can motivate yourself. That's the beauty of it. But it takes effort. Now, the good news is that there is a blueprint, which makes it easier. So based on these two forces, you can see that a team can be the growth zone when they score high on both forces. They can be the apathy zone. That's a nasty place. No safety, no motivation. Comfort zone is like a family, which is good. No motivation, but they feel safe. And anxiety zone is when still people are pushing on, but there's no safety. Now you can also see that numbers can lie. So we can settle down for the average, which is the big donut. We could walk away thinking that everything is good. No, it's not. If you look at the individuals, it's polarized because some people feel like fish in the water, others feel demotivated and rejected. And this is the beauty of it, because when we talk about people skills, motivation, psychological safety, for the clients, it sounds like some voodoo stuff or just abstract. So as soon as you can make it more tangible, you can quantify it, they can see the result, black and white, in front of them, it becomes real, it becomes manageable. Now it's real. That's the thing. But sometimes things go wrong. And it's very much linked to health, the safety as well. We had a client in Scandinavia, oil and gas company. When we did the initial assessment, including the CEO, they were in the apathy zone. During the program, one of the refineries burned down because the lack of psychological safety affected physical safety. The standards were really flexible, and that's not a good idea when you work with flammable stuff. But on the other side, the biggest mining company in Indonesia, they had 17 accidents a week, according to them. As 6 months later, they had 0, and they won the most prestigious awards in health and safety. They turned psychological safety into physical safety. So there are a lot of misunderstandings about the topic. Be nice to people, pay them more. That's going to be enough. No, that doesn't work anymore. That's not how it works. But if you want to take it to the highest level, you have to tap into cognitive diversity. This is the often neglected version, the immune system of a team, the invisible layer. Technically, the only layer of diversity that has proven benefit in terms of performance. The way people think, the way they process information. When two people disagree, that's cognitive diversity. And that's exactly where the potential lies for success or disaster. The benefits are not automatic, and that's exactly why the D&I field was struggling. Increasing diversity without inclusion is a problem. If you focus on inclusion, diversity is going to increase more than likely. The other way around is much more difficult. Here's an example. Look at Emma. She's a good leader, very smart. She can see issues. Emma employs very smart people, but she has no idea about homophilic diversity, which does sound like a disease, but it just means that we like and trust people who are similar to us, people who have common sense, which means that a team can be individually really smart, but blind. We can all agree on the wrong thing. It doesn't make it true. It feels good, but we have a big blind spot. And here's an example of this. 10 senior leaders from 8 different countries. If you look at the standard interculture models, they would be extremely happy with such a diverse team for you. But if you go deeper, you can see that all the 10 people are within this range. If you look at the sliding scale as a range of perspectives, approaches to problems and opportunities, all the 10 people are within this range. And this is not unique. We have plenty of case studies like this. If you are a leader, why would you employ somebody who disagrees with you, who has a different pace, a different background? You don't need that hassle. It's not familiar. The brain doesn't like that. You can force people to celebrate diversity, but your brain doesn't, because by definition, it means unpredictability. And that is the last thing that your brain wants. And that's exactly how we can end up in a team, which means that this group picture would look fantastic on the website, but deep inside, they have a huge blind spot. It's easy to get along, but it's also easy to make a big mistake. Technically, there are 2 main approaches to this topic. One is the intercultural solutions, explaining what is normal and expected. And probably if you Google it, that's exactly what you can find. 5 do's and don'ts in different countries. That's a very outdated idea. Because if you look at the latest research, that approach would be wrong 88 to 98% of the time on individual level. More than 80% of cultural differences exist within countries, not between them. And to make it more exciting, the poorest container of culture is country of origin, gender, and generation, meaning that based on these categories, you cannot predict an individual's values and beliefs. That has nothing to do with science. But if you learn about it and you think, now I understand Germans. No, you don't. What you understand is what is normal in Germany, what is considered, what most people conform to if they want to. But when it comes to individuals, that's not the case. Here's another case study. Everybody grew up in Jakarta, Indonesia. All the participants. So we map them against the country norm. Barely nobody is there, barely anyone. And that would be misleading. So we can highlight huge differences on a national level, but they don't necessarily exist on individual level. So stereotypes are not ideal. You cannot create a high-performing team based on passports. That's the key insight. The second approach is the psychometric models. There are a lot of them. Some of them are popular, some of them are good. There's not much overlap. So think about this beautiful sunflower. You can profile it as much as you want, everything about it. But where do you plant it? In the snow, in the desert, in the middle of the jungle, or in the right environment? Depending on where you put it, you're going to get a very different outcome. We don't exist in isolation. Just remember Carol Dweck. Doesn't matter how smart you are, how much growth mindset you have, the power of the environment is very strong. Your personality determines how you want to behave, but your environment determines how you have to behave. That's why you can never ever separate them. And that's exactly what Global This does. So you can take the assessment and then we go into the 3 layers of the identity. What you do based on that, how you do it, what is your natural communication and behavioral style, and based on that, what are the underlying values and drivers? And that's important because 95% of our actions are driven by that. And we are not even aware of them. But this is not where we stop. We're not going to use it as an excuse that I'm red, you blue, what happened? No, nothing. Because then we just widen the gap instead of building a common ground. It's not even about the absolute scores, it's about the distance between you and another person, you and your environment, because everything is relative. So we can measure the mindset gap between you and different country norms, between you and another person. If you are brave enough, you can use it with your partner at home. The underlying concept is the same. Or the gap between the leader and the team, because often they have the best intention. They have common sense, but somehow it backfires. This is where stereotypes and assumptions don't work. We can map it and exactly what to do. So now going back to Emma, now she is fully certified, she knows everything. Now she can employ really smart people who are also cognitively diverse. So they can see the same situation from different perspectives. So they can make better decisions. And then they can choose to respond instead of just reacting. That is the definition of uncommon mindset, which is technically the definition of cultural intelligence that goes way beyond international differences. So based on these 3 invisible forces, where is your team? Are they in growth zone, where they score high on all the forces? They are in stage 2, time bomb when they have an issue with one? Is it decline when they have a problem with two? Or is it game over when they score low on all three of them? And you can ask any leaders, where is your team? Would it make sense to know the answer to this? Could they make a more informed decision? Could they facilitate a better transformation? Could they have higher performance instead of guessing? Yes. So I promised also 3 different case studies. So the human side of digital transformation, we focus on change leadership. Because when it comes to change management, then you find a lot of solutions. And they look really good on paper in presentations, but when it comes to people, no, that's a problem. That's where things go wrong. And that's why this picture went viral, because you can see that the problem is crystal clear. The solution is crystal clear, but then you have people with very different ideas. There's no alignment, no purpose, no synergy. That's when it goes wrong. So we work with a finance company in South Africa. They wanted to invest a lot in AI transformation, but they were smart enough to check if the people were ready. As it turned out, they were not. 4 out of the 9 biomarkers were suboptimal. So we designed a 6-month program based on that. Not guessing, but that was a precise intervention. We also have to understand that change management or change leadership is not linear. It's a curve. And if people know what's going on, then they're not panicking. So we also separated the executive committee and the leadership team. And you can see that they were in different stages. And one of the main problems was that there were 4 senior leaders and they created 2 silos. Number 1 and 2, high up, and then they had number 3 and 4. And that interaction affected the management team as well, and also the employees. So this is where they had to make a decision. What do you do? Because the result is predictable. Now you can make an informed decision. Do you have a united vision or you carry on? We know where it leads to. And this is what we can use in HR and coaching. That's how we can become a strategic partner, because we can bring that memory back from the future. Life becomes much more predictable in a way. It's not always pleasant, but more predictable. This was of a pharmaceutical company, Fortune 200. They merged 3 different departments and we worked with them. 6 months later, they had 4 times higher engagement than with any other teams in the last 15 years. And this is also important because a lot of potential is lost in a team. And we can assume what the problems are, but if you address the symptoms, then the root causes of the issues don't change. They're still there. And they're still affecting you. But if you have only stories, they're just noise. If you have only data, that's boring. That's powerless. But when you combine both, that's when magic happens. And that's exactly what we do. When we work with clients, then the ultimate goal is to create a meaningful conversation driven by data and rooted in science. Because it's very difficult to talk about something that we are not aware of. We can discuss the symptoms, how we feel, but that's not going to be resourceful. Highly unlikely. We can see that. So how do you give people the vocabulary and a frame of reference to have those conversations? It's not just about the intention. This is what a lot of leaders mention, that, oh, I just delegate. Yes, you can delegate if people have the skills and the motivation to do something. And often that's the missing part. And that's a different company in the Netherlands, a big bank. So they wanted to have less dependency on external providers because they want to make it more scalable and sustainable. So they certified 10 in-house HR professionals to roll it out to their 65,000 employees. They had engagement surveys, yes, but why don't you change it to something that actually works? So it's not necessarily about spending more, but spending on the right thing. Because what if you solve an issue that is not the real problem? And this is not just a theory. That's why I wanted to share the statistics with you, just to zoom out a little bit to see what's going on. Because when we are busy, we get reactive. Here, the goal is to become more proactive, to have a different perspective. Here's an interesting thing. And we are almost done, I promise. But this is eye-opening. So this was an exercise I did with one of the robots and said, if you were an evil leader, how would you ruin a company? And it came up with 6 steps. Now, the interesting thing is that we scanned a lot of teams globally, and the results came up with the same 6 behaviors. How to ruin the future of a company. How to disengage people as quickly as possible. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you do it intentionally or unintentionally, the outcome is exactly the same. And that is the eye-opening part. One was immediately suppress psychological safety. So people don't speak up, they're not sharing anything, they're not inclusive. Micromanagement, people love that. Ruining autonomy immediately and accountability. Have your favorite people. Why would be equal? Why would we be inclusive? That's not good for anyone. 4th one, undermining growth and development. And that's exactly what we can see. When you're going through a transformation, what is the first thing that they cut? Training budget. Why would you support people who are struggling? Let them suffer and expect them to be motivated. That does already work. Short-term gains. And yes, it's understandable. You have to survive in order to thrive. But without a purpose, without a long-term plan, it's very difficult to be motivated. Often the motivation comes from the clarity of the vision. And if you don't have that, then you go for survival and poor communication. Because when you leave too much space for assumptions, then we make up stuff, and that is detrimental. And this is the thing here, that the cracks take a long time to appear on a dam. But once it's visible, the collapse is really close. And that's exactly what's happening in companies. Often you don't know what's going on beneath the surface. But when you see the symptoms, it might be too late. It's almost like termites in the wood. You don't see them for long, but when you do, then you can't do much about it. So how about doing something to prevent the cracks? And that's exactly what we can do. So this is a simplified version of what we do. The team readiness scan. People can take the 2 assessments and we can prepare this 1-pager. We can look at the 3 forces: psychological safety, cognitive diversity, and motivational drivers. We can see the team dynamics. We can benchmark it against external sources, and we can see exactly how the biomarkers score. Not guessing, measuring. And they can get a short report. What are the chances that they would succeed compared to other companies? This is where we start. So what I would like to offer to some people is this, the team readiness scan. A complimentary 9 biomarkers for 3 teams altogether, up to 10 people, with a debrief. If you want to do it, email me, let's have a chat, and if it's the right fit, we can do it. And that's also supported by Gloria. She's our AI coach. She's fully trained on our methodology. She's using the same data, and she can be there 24/7. And that's her picture. So I asked Gloria, so show me what you look like, and this is what she said. This is her picture. That's a passport photo, so Gloria is always available. So that is a digital extension of us, not a replacement, just a digital extension. And if somebody knows that this is what they want to do, we have a certification already in September, so we do it twice a year. This is the last one this year. If you're interested, drop me a message, and then I can show you something that's not visible here. That's my promise. So